All right, welcome back. I hope you're having an awesome time so far. Our next panel is titled The New Tour, How Technology Has Revolutionized the Modern Leasing Process. Please join me in welcoming our panelists to the virtual stage.
Excellent. Thank you, Patrika, and thank you, RETCON. We are very excited to be bringing this panel to you all, talking about leasing and technology in leasing. We all know the last year and a half has been quite the journey when it comes to leasing in our industry. And there's some really fun topics we want to talk about today, especially virtual and self-guided tours and how just general leasing technology was revolutionizing the space pre-COVID, but then how everything accelerated and how we're settling in now, what might become permanent fixtures in the leasing process, what role technology continues to play for leasing, and a lot of fun stuff. I don't want to have any spoilers, and I want to get to letting our panel talk about all of those great topics. But first, real quick, I am Matt Wierich. I'm the co-founder, CEO of Realync. We are multifamily's leading virtual leasing and resident engagement solution using pre-recorded and live video to facilitate conversations in the leasing process. So something we are very near and dear to, but I am just here to facilitate. The stars of the show, I want to give a chance to introduce themselves as well. So maybe Brent, would love to have you start and we go around and introduce yourselves.
Thanks, Matt. My name is Brent Steiner. I'm the founder and CEO of Engrain. We have a touring and mapping platform solution for the multifamily space, have over 5,000 properties mapped and have a lot of experience in this topic and very happy to be here and talk about it.
Excellent. Gigi?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gigi Giannoni. I'm Senior Vice President of Customer Experience for Gables Residential. Very excited to be on this panel and looking forward to some very enticing conversation about what the future holds for all of us in this industry.
Absolutely. Steve?
Yeah, I'm Steve Halsey. I'm Managing Director of Wood Partners. We're a large development company in the top three largest developers in the country. We operate in 18 states, 23 major markets. We maintain about 20,000 units a year through our merchant building model. And we're a vertically integrated company with development, construction, and management services.
Excellent. Thank you, Steve. Excited to have you on. Scott?
Hi, I'm Scott Berka, Senior Managing Director of Brand and Customer Experience at Greystar, and excited to be back here at RETCON.
Perfect. Well, thank you guys again for stepping in on this conversation, a very relevant one and a fun one. It's an ever-evolving space. And I feel like even thus far in 2021, things continue to change month over month. But trying to stay focused on the conversation, we're a long way from the days of pen and paper leasing, thankfully. And there's been an influx of prop tech companies focusing on the multifamily sector, but specifically the leasing process. Really over the last 3 to 5 years, there's been such a boost in dedicated focus on technology, changing and enhancing leasing. So I'm curious, what have you guys seen as the biggest advancements in the leasing space over the last few years that have really revolutionized what your teams are doing from a leasing standpoint? And I know you were last on the introduction, so maybe Scott, if you can provide a little insight into what you guys have seen and what you think on that side of things.
Yeah, happy to, Matt. So I think I'll take the obvious point right out of the gate, which is COVID changed a lot for everyone in this industry, well, everyone in the world across all industries. And I think to your point, there has been an influx of prop tech companies, especially in the leasing space. The point I want to make is actually not a technology one, interestingly. And I think what has happened when I look at the last 18 months specifically is that our on-site teams have embraced some of this top technology and have a willingness to really work with it in a way that historically, this has really been a manual process. This has been about, hey, I have a lead, I'm going to nurture that lead. I need to make that direct relationship. And when you look out at other industries, it's digital sales and that relationship is very well trodden territory. But I think we are still catching up, and really COVID has required a lot of our on-site teams to embrace it in a way that I think otherwise would have been much slower. So certainly that's true from an adoption standpoint of technology, but really just the culture and change management, because this is fundamentally both a digital and relationship-based process, the process of leasing. So, I think that's something that is, while maybe unsurprising, a very important component of what COVID has done for us over the last 18 months.
I would have a tendency to agree with that for sure. I think Scott hit the nail on the head, but I also want to say that I think the blessing in disguise behind COVID is the fact that it did accelerate the need of the use for the right technology on site to be able to propel us forward into a place and space where other businesses are already at. So sometimes we have a tendency to be a little bit behind the 8 ball. And this, I think, gave us an opportunity to step back and say, okay, we need the momentum to propel us forward, to really be able to integrate the use of technology and the use of experience and engagement to be able to make a difference in what we're doing. And with the advent of COVID, we're all getting there, I think, a lot faster. And I also think that technology companies have been prompted to have to be able to move faster as well, to be able to deliver upon their product too, because it is ever changing, but the demand is much greater now. And instead of potentially moving backwards, it's a chance for us to really move forward quickly.
Yeah, I've been in the business a long time. I've been in the business 35 years. And when I started in this business, all you needed was a good yellow page ad, a Saturday ad in the newspaper, some Saturday balloons, and a good monument sign. And that was your entire leasing process. And what I've been most impressed with, and I think you need to take it and break it down into 3 separate silos when you start talking about technology and the impact technology has had on the leasing process. And the first is that leasing or marketing aspect of getting that prospect to the point of sale or signing that application. And the thing that's impressed me the most over the last several years is the sophistication of our internet listing services and how they have really added a number of services that have really helped get that prospect to the finish line for us. And between the interactive site maps and the ability to follow up has been just monumental in the last 3 to 4 years. And I agree with Gigi. I think that was highly accelerated during the COVID-19. And then I think you need to take that second silo and say, what is the prospect experience once they're on site, and how has that been impacted by technology? And that has really jumped. Luckily, all of us here on this panel, we're this is all the time. And so we were kind of on that leading edge of technology and self-guided tours and virtual tours, but we hadn't taken the quantum leap. We hadn't accelerated to the level that COVID caused us to do. But the things that were being done by the self-guided tour companies, the things that were being done by other management companies in terms of their own integrated self-guided tours, I think accelerated the virtual tour prospect and Facebook and the ability for our leasing people to use these technologies effectively and zoom around the properties and start their own dialogues and start their own was very interesting to me. And then I think the third silo we need to look at in terms of technology is once that person makes a decision on that asset is the application process. That really changed because there was so much virtual tours and so many different things going on. Self-guided tours, there was a lot of fraud and a lot of things going on that we needed to carve out and understand from a technology standpoint, from the screening to the ID verification to all of these other things that were impacting us. So I think COVID accelerated this probably 10 years ahead of where we normally would have been had we just gone on our normal evolutionary process in those 3 silos.
Yeah, I'll come at this from the sort of vendor partner side. I agree. I think COVID drove innovation necessity. And on the vendor side, we did not, and Matt, I'm sure can agree to this, we had to step up and we had to listen to what our clients needed at the time, and it was urgent. And now here we are a year later, and where we're now our clients, we work with all the self-guided tour platforms and are learning from them and their clients. And my counsel to our clients now is, this is not a technology problem. This is the people and a process and then a technology problem. And there is no one thing that will work across all modern portfolios. And so we need to be really strategic in kind of how we handle that and how we work together. And Steve, I'm glad you mentioned the ILSs, because that's a place that we've been, our clients tend to not like to have to pay an ILS, but if they're going to have to, then they need to deliver leases, not just more leads that we can't reply to. And so I think it's those sort of industry innovations that have been very refreshing to see, albeit a little painful, but at the end of the day, I think very positive.
I think that's important, Brent. I think you made a very good statement there at the very beginning, is that our vendors listened and they cooperated with us, because each of us have different situations and different criteria that we need to meet. Gigi at Gables and Greystar and Wood Partners, we all have different. I have to lease 100% of my units every year because I'm a merchant builder. I need that sophistication on the front end that you deliver to make my business work.
Yeah, and one thing, Gigi, that you had mentioned is that access to technology as well for your teams. I'm curious, I'd done a panel with Irene from Lincoln a while back, and one thing that she was talking about was pre-COVID, they would pick and choose what teams got what technology based on the market that they're in, or is it new construction, lease up, stabilize, things like that. But one thing that COVID did was made them realize all of their teams need equal access to this technology and they need support in that. Have you guys seen the same sort of thing? Are you now looking at technologies as a general broad swath access equally for all of your teams across the portfolio, or are you still being a little fine-tuning on what specific teams need?
No, I think the only exception we ever make to not having the technology rolled out across the board at all, our entire portfolio across the country, is if we come up and have a new technology that's on the horizon that we want to test or pilot, then we might do that at a lease up or a stabilized community, depending on what's happening, if there's a greater need and or if it's something we just want to try out. But we have learned over the years that it is difficult enough to train our associates across the country on one technology and enable them to have the opportunity, if they want to transfer somewhere, to be able to take that knowledge base with them. If we were to ask them to now learn 2 or 3 different technologies, one, I think we lose tremendous accountability for the deliverables that we expect from them. And 2, it makes the whole reporting process very, very complicated. So we prefer to have tremendous synergy and roll out our programs across the board.
Yeah, and I think it's hard to measure in terms of your BI tools or your business intelligence. If you're running many, many different software programs, it's very hard to get the relevant statistics to make decisions on what's being most effective. So I totally agree with you, Gigi.
Yeah, and actually, Steve, you bring something up there. We do obviously third-party management as well as our own management of our own assets. And we have come to the point where we actually make it required that there's certain programs and softwares that our third-party owners, should they want our services, have to utilize, because we're not the size of a Greystar, so we don't have a support staff that's very, very large to be able to maintain and support the different software programs. Now, we might tailor reporting, but as far as utilization of the software, it has to be used across the board. And unfortunately or fortunately, we're willing to walk away from contracts if that's not the case, because we believe wholeheartedly in that deliverable. And it makes us a lot better at what we do, and we can deliver information and data that is accurate. So.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm curious, Scott, from the customer experience side of Greystar, you guys have so many different asset types, so many different orgs under Greystar. How are you guys managing that leasing process, where if a prospect goes to one Greystar property and then goes to another Greystar property, are you guys looking at it that way of making sure that you're having similar experiences property to property? Or talk a little bit about that experience across such a broad organization.
Yeah, it's definitely broad. You hit the nail on the head there. The number of permutations is staggering. It's funny, Gigi, as you say, like, oh, we've mandated kind of a single tech stack, just to put that in different words. I'm like, oh, that would be amazing. When I think about across 2,500 assets, sometimes it feels like we have 2,500 different permutations of tools.
You all live in a definitely a different world than Gables and a lot of us because of your size and your locations, and it's got to be challenging. Yeah.
Well, it cuts both ways, I think, right? And Matt, you alluded to the positive. I think with the scale we have comes opportunity and frankly the ability to learn from different areas and apply that broadly. Of course, the inverse of that is getting consistency across so many different clients. Some of those are our own assets. It's just a huge challenge. But yeah, Matt, to answer your question, there's really two ways that we're looking at this. The first is across all of our assets. This is a terrible phrase from someone who leads customer experience, but what's like the lowest common denominator experience? And I don't mean from what's the least value, but what is the part of the experience that you want to be true everywhere? It's like you should never be below this, whether that's the way you interact with a leasing professional, whether that's the way the lease itself works. And Steve, I liked your framing of the 3 steps, and we think about it similarly, but really having that set of processes and technology that enables us kind of a minimum standard, if you will. Now, simultaneously, what we're looking at doing is actually changing the experience where it's leveraging the scale that we have in the network that we have. Historically, as an industry, we lease every property as if it's its own entity. And that's the way that our leasing professionals are trained. That's the way the technology has worked historically. We are, I would say, not maybe for the first time, but at scale, looking at saying, how can we, from a customer standpoint, think about the Greystar network as a whole? So if you're coming to us, why have you only talked about the one property on this block that you're interested in? Chances are you're looking at multiple apartments. That's just the way our consumers shop. Very rarely are you just looking at one. So why don't we have a conversation about the 4 properties in this 20 block radius that we manage as opposed to just the one? So that's something that we have just gotten into over the last year that I think is really exciting. And it's something that the scale that we've mentioned, it's the opportunity that provides, although it doesn't come without its challenges.
Absolutely. And Brent, I'm curious on your side with the vendor side. You guys are integrated top of funnel with marketing and through the leasing process in a lot of different ways. What is some of the feedback? What are some of the things that you and your team have been seeing over the last year and a half of how teams are implementing Engrain's technologies, but also have you collected any of that sentiment about how it's changing those interactions with prospects and things like that?
Yeah, for sure. I think sort of two things come to mind. One, just sort of the crushing amount of content that's being produced now, partly your fault, thank you, that has changed the experience. Like people can get, a renter can get everything they need from the website to start this conversation, down to the unit level. Like we're now starting to integrate virtual tours and things like that at the unit level. And so when people come on site, we need to be able to accommodate what we're calling flexible touring situations. So maybe it's self-tour, maybe it's guided tour, maybe it's a combination of them, but our clients are now wanting to explore things like what we call centralized leasing, where, as you mentioned, Scott, you can actually see inventory across multiple assets or in a call center environment. But I think the big thing that we've observed, and we sort of knew about this before COVID, but now we've been able to definitively see it in the data, is that renters want to pick their apartment. They do not want to necessarily be having forced down the path of a floor plan type, which is a pretty old construct in the industry. And that makes sense because all apartments is more of a hospitality model traditionally, where you're telling them you want a 1-bedroom, well, here's an A1. And if we don't have the right price and move-in date, then they might leave. And they might pick an A2 if it meets that other criteria. And so giving everybody all the information they need elegantly and quickly, and then have it seamlessly go into that application process, which we're finally starting to see as an industry, some movement there. That's all goes back to customer experience, to making it easy.
I love that, and love that call out. And Gigi, I was coming your direction. I wanted to see if you had any thoughts about that transformation and that interaction of leasing teams interacting with prospects and some of that sentiment.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the greatest challenges that we're going to face is to find that right balance between technology and still delivering exceptional customer service. The difference being as we move forward into new generations, and even today's generations, is that they want choices, they want to drive the process, and more importantly, they are even more demanding with delivering a high level of customer service. The big difference is they wanted to be there when they want it to be there. And so 24/7, whatever the case may be, they want to make sure that they have that experience that they're looking for. And if not, they know they have plenty of other choices and places to go. And so having that level of accountability with the use of technology and then converting that so that our associates still understand that even though technology is there, there is even greater pressure now to deliver at the back end with that customer and to be front facing, because your opportunities might be less. So when you talk about that you have one chance to make a good first impression, that applies now more than it ever did before, because if you do not grab them and deliver on the expectation, they're gone, they'll walk. And I think one of the things that was brought up that I find fascinating is that years ago in my prior life in other industries, they went to centralizing leasing offices and sales offices, et cetera. And I think this is something that for years has been batted around in our industry, but I would not be surprised if that takes greater steps in the near future than it ever has before, because of the exact reason that everybody has been talking about. Everybody has access to everything on the website digitally at their fingertips. So why not maximize the opportunity if you're paying for that prospect and that tour to give them every option available to see what they would like to see, and not necessarily have to drive from community A to community B to community C. Why not centralize the leasing opportunity into central leasing centers? Because we are going to have, right, virtual tours. We are going to have, you know, anybody that wants to do a tour on their own after hours or before hours. We might even move to during hours. So there's so many other things that we're offering now that was not part of the model of before, that I think will really, really move forward this opportunity for us to be able to talk about centralized leasing offices. And the roles of our leasing associates will still be necessary. They'll just be very different.
I will say that is probably one of our biggest takeaways over the last year and a half as a virtual leasing solution with pre-recorded and live video. One of the things we saw tried and true was the power of the human element in the leasing process. And with the live video tours in particular, that's the most transparent experience you can get outside of the prospect physically being there. And that human touch in the process builds that trust in the relationship and instills that transparency and really helps drive the process forward. And so we're completely aligned there. Virtual doesn't mean a lack of human element. It just means new elements in that process. So I love that you hit on that. And Steve, curious your sentiment on some of that, some of the centralized aggregating of leasing opportunities. Is that something that has entered conversations for you guys?
You know, it started in our conversations last year as we were seeing virtual tours really take off, and it was driving about 70% of our leases. In the last quarter, we've seen that almost reverse. We're back to almost 89.5% in-person tours, and our virtual and self-guided tours have gone down dramatically. It's also very interesting to see the conversion rate to application on each of those sources, whether it's in-person, virtual, or self-guided tours. And, you know, the in-person tours are closing at about 25 to 30%. Our virtual tours are closing at about 17, and the self-guided tours are closing at about 15. Now, that doesn't mean that we have all of the technology in place to capture that experience and make sure that the self-guided tours are as powerful as they could be. But it's interesting to see that sort of morph back to that and I think Gigi's right on it. People want that personal touch. And if I'm going to make a $24,000 decision, you know, $2,000 rent a year rent, I kind of want to, and especially in my business where everything that I do is almost new. You know, it's lease ups. People want to see it. They want to feel it. They want to get the experience of the amenities. They want to be explained why this was built here, what was the vision, all of those things that we teach our leasing people. And I still think that the in-person tour, if we go away from that too quickly, will have a negative impact on the leasing process and our ability to connect with the residents. And we pride ourselves on our Aura scores and our ratings and reviews, and I think that that's a huge part of the technology that's being facilitated out there, and I think that touch point improves that ratings and review process when they can have all of their questions answered.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're very spot on with something. This is still a home, even though it's rental, right? It's still a home. It's still where they're going to spend their time. They're going to be with their families. So unlike a product, that touch and feel and making sure that it fits them is extremely important. And so I do believe that still will continue. I think the face of it will change as to when it comes into the process and how it evolves. But I do think as we move forward, and I'll age myself a little bit and say, and as my generation gets older and the other generations start coming forward, I think those generations will have grown up in a different environment. So they will be more comfortable, like buying cars without seeing them and things like that. They will see that more as part of their MO and looking for a home. I don't think that's going to happen tomorrow, but I think it is definitely going to be on the horizon.
I do too. And once again, I think that that's why technology is so important, and that we constantly be looking at. I think companies that don't go to these type of conferences and look at technology and have discussions with the Brents and the Matts constantly on what's happening and what are they seeing across their client base are making a huge mistake, because you're going to be behind the technology curve. And that is somewhere that we do not want to go. And that's why we have our innovation committee meetings, and we're looking at technology constantly to see, because if you ask me what's the most valuable commodity our leasing people have, it's time. And if we can really leverage that time so that they're more interactive with the prospect instead of doing paperwork and doing the follow-up and having more automated, all of these. I mean, look at a leasing person. That person probably has 27 different transactions on a daily basis.
Right.
That's between picking up the phone, the tours, making sure that the show trail is perfect, making all of these different transactions they're doing. We need to make sure that their time is being spent on the most, I think it's a Pareto principle, 20% of what I focus on is going to get 80% of my results. We need to make sure that they're focused on that huge 20% and leverage everything else in from technology.
Yeah,
I think you're right on, Gigi.
And
We're seeing, back that up, our clients using leasing teams to drive renewals and rent growth is now actually a possibility, since we're able to be more specific with leads and technology and things like that. And that's the kind of holy grail of why everybody's doing this to begin with. And it's just a changing role, and it's different by property and by market and by demographic, and flexibility is key in that.
Yeah.
I think I'd want to add into this conversation. I think everyone on this panel would agree with me when I say a big, we talk a lot about in this industry about like what are the operational impacts, and like, well, how does that affect our leasing professionals? And that's super important. So don't get me wrong there, but all of this has to start with the customer, right? And I think everyone has said some version of that already. And I think it's important that we look at how do the prospects, how do they want to go through this journey? And I would say there have and will continue to be multiple touch points in the leasing process. It's not like someone just comes on site and they're like, yep, took a tour and it's done, or they just go to the website and they're like, yo, I saw you, it was the perfect website, I signed a lease on the spot. I think the reality is it's what is the balance of those things, and how does each touch point move someone closer to that decision, and how do we do that more efficiently? And one thing that we've done recently is we did a whole bunch of consumer research and found that upwards of 70% of prospects would either be neutral or would prefer a self-guided tour option, just stated. And that's a huge number. And I think most of our on-site teams were shocked when they heard that, because there's just this preconceived notion that like, no, people want me to walk them around, and that's the way it has to be done. But when we ask people, they're like, yeah, take it or leave it, which I think is just an interesting thing to know. And the reverse of the inverse of that, and Steve, I was interested to hear the stats you tossed out a second ago. We've actually seen our self-guided tours. We're talking about self-guided, not virtual. I'll come back to that in a minute. But our self-guided tour rates are holding at 30 to 40% as a percentage of all tours, and the conversion rates we see among that is actually similar to the in-person tours. So if we can continue to shift people to self-guided tours and get similar conversion rates, that unlocks a huge amount of potential for what can our leasing professionals be focused on. Brent, to your point earlier, is that renewals, is that the service experience. So I just want to, we're always going back to what do the customers care about? How do we optimize for that as well?
I agree, and I think it's geographic too. I think that California, we continue to see a high number of self-guided tours, virtual tours. In the Baltimore, Maryland area, these statistics that I threw out are more global across the 18 states we operate in. You operate in all of them, but it's interesting to see how each of those geographic areas are adopting to the technology and what they want to see.
I agree 100%. I was going to say, I think a lot of that is driven not only by product type, but by what part of the state you're in, who your actual target demographic is, at least the majority that you're targeting, and also, cultural. So I think there's a lot of different things to take into consideration, which is going to be our greatest challenge, because you can't just walk away from A and B and just do C, or you can't walk away from A, B, C, and D and just do E. You have to keep everything top of mind and watch the data and see what's working where, because that just makes a huge difference. And I'm hoping we'll get into conversations later about this, because you just touched on that. But I think the use of a CRM, customer relationship management system, for us has been an absolute game changer over the last handful of years. And when you talk about customer experience, when you talk about touch points, when you talk about measuring follow-up and responsiveness and engagement and holding our associates accountable, major game changer. And so I just wanted to throw that in there for further conversation down the road here.
And we can definitely stay with that, Gigi. So with some of the stats that Steve had thrown out and Scott talking about shifting needs and priorities for leasing teams and things like that, I am curious with what you were just talking about, being able to track with your CRM. Are you guys now tracking new things and holding your leasing teams accountable to things that 2 years ago, even pre-COVID, you were not at all tracking or holding them accountable to doing? Would love to hear a little bit about that.
Well, you would try and track it, and you would try and hold them accountable, but it made it a lot more difficult. And you really didn't have anything to back your gut feeling and or to back what you were questioning or not questioning. And I see a handful of people shaking their heads going, yeah. But the CRM gave us a tremendous tool to be able to measure 5, 10, 15, 20 different things, from engagement scores to follow-up timeframes to conversion to prospect to traffic to tours to leases, in so much greater detail. Though it is just absolutely amazing. We can now pull up dashboards. We know how our leasing consultants are performing, who's following up with exactly what prospect within what period of time. And you can see if you're not responding within X period of time, which is not only less than 24 hours, but it is less than 3 hours, you have lost that prospect. They are history. They're gone. And so the CRM has been able to allow us to know exactly where to focus. And it could be different, right? What we focus on with our teams in the DC market, they could be doing great on item 1 through 3 and horrible on the other items, and vice versa in the Texas market. So it gives us a great tool, and it gives our managers a wonderful tool to be able to manage the productivity or lack thereof and how people are performing. And then that drives everything, how we train, how we market, how we hire. So it has been a real blessing being able to implement a CRM. And it's painful. I mean, the learning curve, like any technology, is huge, and it's painful, but once you get through it, the payoff is tremendous.
It also gives you, Gigi, obviously you know this, like it's the first step to owning your own data and your attribution. So our big vision, before I'm finished, we want to be serving ads that are retargeted to a specific apartment with content that matters. And that's just something the industry just does not do today. And it's because of lack of connection of that customer journey. And our
That's exactly
clients, the
right.
ones that The ones that own their data are in a power position to do that and work with companies like ours and our different partners who are willing to work together and not have this black box of lead attribution that we kind of suffer through in multifamily. Like that's just first.
And Brent, you just hit, I mean, that is just, yes, huge point, because the reality is anybody who has a marketing director, a VP of marketing or a marketing team, they will attest to the fact that every time there is a slight downturn, everybody goes, we need more traffic. You go through the weekly stats. What's the first thing everybody says? Well, we didn't hit our numbers. Well, why? We need more traffic. We need more traffic. And so, you know, everybody's always scrambling, right, to get more traffic. And you might have some data that says, well, you know, we see though that you're getting plenty of, well, it's not qualified traffic. Well, you know, so that list now, since the inception of the CRM, I can honestly say that in maybe 15% of our conversations, we hear we need more traffic, because everybody knows now the minute that comes out of their mouth, boom, you go right to the dashboard. You can go down as detailed as you want, and you will see you don't need more traffic because you have 150 pieces of traffic that are sitting in the queue that have not been responded to, by the way. So, and I think for managers, and this is not picking on any aspect of operations because our entire team has come together to work on this, but what it does is it gives everybody a much clearer sight of where we need to focus versus going to what is typically the standard in our industry. It has just made it a much more sophisticated go forward look at how we do business.
And I would say that the BI tools that people are integrating into their companies are having a huge benefit too, in terms of integrating all of the information that we're getting from all of our tech companies into one warehouse or one technology package that gives us the ability to look at different things from a different lens. And sometimes we get biases as to what's the most important metric, and we miss others that could be so much more important. And you know, that integration that's happening in our industry is so important as we all build out our BI tools.
Yeah, and the APIs, no matter what software systems people have, the API is critical because that's what feeds the PI tools, right? And so you can have a myriad of systems, but if they're all feeding the data into one overarching software platform, then that's great. If they can't integrate, then you've got a lot of challenges on your hands.
My team always laughs at me because I always say Realync's a sharp tool in a larger toolbox. And that's exactly it. You have to integrate everything into that full all-encompassing look, view.
But that didn't happen until about 5 years ago. That everyone wanted to be siloed. Everyone wanted to, you know, keep their information, and I'm only going to feed you this, and that whole technology mentality has changed greatly. And I would say, well, probably longer than that, maybe 8 years and 5 years. And giving people that access to that information has been very, very helpful.
Yeah, I know there's so many things I can pull out of this where we go next, but I am curious from a boots on the ground training standpoint, with so much more data informing actions and activities and so many new technologies feeding into the process, where we now need leasing teams to have specific actions, propose specific things to drive that process forward, capitalize on those first opportunities and first touch points with leads. What are you guys doing from a training standpoint to refocus, retrain, and really energize your leasing teams in that new direction? Scott, I'm curious if you guys have been revamping any training programs, doing anything new. How are you guys working with your teams to make sure they're equipped to deliver on that vision and those outcomes?
Yeah, it's funny. I think that question comes a bit full circle for me on the first comment I had earlier at the top of this panel, where I think training is the biggest challenge, right? You can come up with the perfect technology, but there will always be a people element to it. And, you know, I've seen so many great technology initiatives just fall flat on their face because the implementation or the rollout just wasn't supported. You spend all this time in your sandbox and then you're like, okay, here you go. And no one catches it. So, you know, the way we've been approaching that really is trying to take and part of this is just given the breadth we have of our network, right? So to roll out across 2,500 properties is a daunting task for even a small thing, especially when you're talking about big tech changes. So we've taken a very, let's prove this out in a pilot form or in a sandbox form. And we have a dedicated team that is looking at the end-to-end experience, the technology aspect of it, the people aspect of it, the training aspect of it, the consumer aspect of it, so that they're responsible for, yes, making sure the technology works, but also making sure the training and the materials and the support for the on-site teams is there, but not just once, right? It's let's go roll it out to a few properties. Let's make sure it works, and it's not all going to work. So let's make it better when we learn from that. So this is this constantly iterative kind of process and feedback loop, both from the training standpoint, but of course from the customer standpoint too. So having that mechanism in place has been really powerful for us to just make sure, as we accelerate the pace of technology, the people side of it isn't getting left behind, because if it does, it doesn't work.
Absolutely. And Brent, I'm curious, from some of the implementations that you guys have been doing over the last year and a half as well, have you guys revamped some of your training? Are you partnering with clients in new, different ways to make sure that that training element is there when you guys are rolling out?
Yeah, I think, if we're being honest, tech companies are really good at sales, and then they kind of fall on implementation, and we need to, it's a constant struggle telling my team, clients love us, and then they hate us, and then they love us, and we need to like stabilize that. And it's training and people. Like, we need to make our clients hold us accountable for the rollout. And then we got to keep, so we've stood up, just this last year, we've stood up a webinar series for all of our products. And sometimes our people will show up and no one will be there. And I insist, I'm like, you got to keep going, because someday someone's going to be there, like Greystar. Like, we have access to all Greystar regionals, and just communicating with them, the burden has to be on us. And Matt, I'm sure you agree with that. We have to own that burden. And it's got to be a long-term commitment, or it's not going to work, and people are going to be frustrated. And yeah, as you guys were talking about that, my heart was beating a little bit.
Yeah, and I think it also needs to be very much top driven. I think that the entire senior management team needs to be on board for any sort of technology rollout. That's why it's very important that our innovation committees are staffed with, or at least our senior advisors are in those meetings, so that they understand the benefits. Because if they don't believe in the technology when it's rolled out, and they think that they had no say in the technology that's being rolled out, they will not support the technology that's being rolled out. And you need to have that senior support of any management company supporting that technology rollout, or it will fail. And we spent a lot of time on that, making sure that everyone's bought in, their questions are asked before we roll out any technology. When I came to Wood Partners, we had over 170 software programs running in the organization, because we were a regional company and not a national company. And it was amazing as we began to whittle them down to see the sort of buy-in that people began to develop because of that. So, but it needs buy-in. Technology needs buy-in.
Constraints are important. I think what Gables has done is great, and it can be frustrating to vendors, but you've got to have some constraints in place, because these organizations can only take on so much.
And Brent, I do want to say something too that we are very passionate about at our company, and that is, around a handful of years ago, we really shifted from working with vendors. And I know these are just words, but we really embrace this. And we work with strategic alliances. If somebody's going to come and approach us and pitch us, and they do so in a vendor-like fashion, we honestly don't have any interest in talking to them. Because as much as we have to ebb and flow and change to move our business forward, we believe anybody worth their salt from the product side has to be able and willing to do the same. And if they're not, we're just not the right partner for them. If they are, we will go through the ups and downs, and we will be there and be your alliance. We don't expect perfection. We expect good customer service. And we are willing to pilot things and be on the forefront and learn from those mistakes. But I think the days of people just being vendors, at least in our book, is long gone. We can't afford that as a company. Not time-wise, not energy-wise, not cost-wise. It's just not worth it.
Yeah, it's not if things go bad occasionally, it's when they go bad. How are we all going to work together?
That's
Totally
right.
agree.
That's
One
right.
thing I wanted to add is, we've talked about in Matt, I know you didn't frame it this way intentionally, but it's a little bit of like, hey, how do we train the on-site teams? And Steve, I think you alluded to this in your commentary, is that we fundamentally believe that there's a lot we need to get as input from the on-site team. It's not just, hey, let's push this out. It's almost like, hey, be part of the solution because you see it every day. You live it, stuff that, and let's face it, that those of us sitting here on this panel, we're not sitting on site every day. We don't see the stuff that they do. So they need to not just be recipients, they need to be part of the solution. So it isn't just about how do we push this out, it's about how do we get that thinking really baked in from the beginning. So I just think that's an important point as we talk about any sort of training or rollout.
Absolutely. One of my favorite quotes that I've heard was actually I think it was April timeframe, in the thick of things. And there was a property manager in, I think, Kansas City of all markets that, in my opinion, hit the nail on the head. And I've never forgotten his quote. He said, it's not our job as a leasing team to decide what someone can or cannot do or does or doesn't want to see anymore. It's our job to provide the opportunity. And it was an on-site team member that absolutely blew my mind with his mindset around how he is approaching leasing and how he's approaching every single conversation that he's able to enter with his team. And so I'm right there with you, Scott. We definitely need to approach everything with ears open, willing to learn and listen as well. So we have 2 minutes left. I definitely want to end with a fun, forward-looking question. I always like asking people, what's next? What's in the pipeline? Where do you think we're going over the next 12, 18, 24 months? Is there new technology that has you excited? Do you think we're going to settle back into a little bit of the way things were, but with an asterisk of new technology layered in? Kind of just talk to me, 30-second, quick hit. What's next? Where we're going? Let's start with you, Steve.
I would, I tried to guess for 35 years in this business, and I would not even dare answer that question. I know that we're looking at a number of very exciting things, but I wouldn't even dare answer that question. We're moving so quickly, and this last year moved us ahead 10 years. So I'm very excited to see what happens.
Love it. Gigi?
I think CRM, self-guided tours, artificial intelligence, bots, all these buzzwords are going to be things we are all going to be spending a lot of time looking at over the next 12 to 18 to 24 months. I think it's going to be the focus of most of our industry conferences and the focus of what a lot of our technology and training and marketing teams spend their time on. How quickly we move forward and how quickly we advance is yet to be seen, but I think there will be change coming, and I'm excited that it's going to be coming faster than typical in our industry.
For sure. Scott?
Yeah, two things. I think one, at least from Greystar's perspective, making sure we don't go backwards, right? A lot of the things that we've adopted in the last 18 months, if we're not careful, we might revert to the old state, and it's really important to us that we don't unless there's a good reason to do that. And I think second, just to highlight one thing, and Brent, you mentioned this earlier, my background is outside of this industry, and when I think about the marketing technology and sophistication that exists elsewhere, I think about A/B testing, I think about multi-touch attribution and things that, CRM, Gigi, as you mentioned, enables. I'd love to see us get there, 3 to 5 years down the road, because that would unlock so much additional opportunity that we really haven't touched on even within this COVID world. So I'm certainly excited to see where that takes us, but that's not a projection. To Steve's point, I wouldn't venture to do so, but I think that's something that could really add a lot of value in this industry.
I love it. And Brent, I'm not asking you to give away the secret sauce of Engrain, but what's next? What's your vision for where we go?
We think that all data and every prop tech vendor provider sort of exists to add information to a unit. And we passionately believe that that unit is a physical space in the world and it's real estate. So we think there will be a map in every application that our teams have to use and that we have to use. And the fact that we're not visualizing data within the lens of the property map is crazy. And we think it's inevitable at this point.
Yep, I could not agree more. I we have a lot of shared visions in that. So that's why we're
Yes, we do.
great partners together. Exactly. Well, thank you everyone so much. This has been fun, fast and furious. This absolutely flew by, and I just want to keep this conversation going because it's such a fun conversation to be a part of. But thank you all for taking the time to join, for engaging in this conversation. And Patrika, I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks so much, Matt. And a special thank you to all of our panelists. I know the audience is giving you a huge virtual round of applause because this has been an awesome session. And a very special thank you to Matt for moderating and keeping us on time. We appreciate you as well. All right, for the audience, it's time for you to make your way to your next session. Along the way, make sure you accept your connection request and take some time to check out our amazing exhibits. Thanks so much, and we'll see you around.